Okay, great. And so then that leads to this sort of other perspective that might be more on a tantric perspective, and that is so in the area that I live, there's kind of, especially among the youth, a propensity towards extreme emotions and displaying them very openly and expressing vulnerability and raw rage. And a lot of it's kind of around social justice issues.
Yeah, well, this is often what happens when the ego gets hold of the tantric approach and appropriates it for its own needs.
That was what I was asking. Yeah, because
Yeah, very common, particularly in your part of the world.
right, but in um, so those people who are sort of doing the extreme emotions and all that, often feel that the people who are, feeling like, oh, we're all love, peace, and happiness, are a bunch of useless people who are paving the way for injustice.
And our spiritual bypassing and
our spiritual bypassing, and that we're sitting around just thinking that if everybody just recognizes their true nature, everything will be fine, and what's the problem? And
yeah. This is it's a misunderstanding of this approach. It's I'm very familiar with the attitude you're speaking of, and I'm not meaning to suggest that there is not a place for expressing emotion, and I'm not judging that or criticizing that. All I'm saying is that it is a misunderstanding to affiliate it with Tantra, to legitimize it, and somehow validate it
yeah,
by association with the tantric approach is one of the ways that the ego perpetuates itself in spiritual circles. So I'm not criticizing the expression of emotion. I'm just criticizing the affiliation of that approach with tantra. It is a dumbing down of the tantric approach. Misunderstands what happens when the ego appropriates the tantric approach and uses it to perpetuate its own drama.
and that was part of, when you've talked about the tantric path, you've talked about going into the feeling, into the body, bringing it close, but I've never heard you talk about go out and express it or act on it.
Well, you're right, Monica. I would never recommend that.
But there are times, though, when we need to defend vulnerable people.
Okay. No, you're quite right. So, sorry, I should qualify that comment. I would never suggest going out and expressing, let's say, anger, if that anger arises on behalf of the separate self or the ego. However, it is possible for anger to arise on behalf of truth and justice and love. It's usually not necessary, but when truth and justice and love are met with resistance, sometimes it is you can't just smile sweetly at that resistance. You can be reasonable with it to begin with, but at some point it is necessary to raise the volume, and sometimes it is necessary. It is like impersonal anger that arises on behalf of truth and love and justice, and that is perfectly valid. I have no problem with that. It is necessary sometimes. So it's not the anger itself or the expression of anger that I have a problem with. It is the one on whose behalf that anger rises and acts.
Yeah, and I think that's the question that isn't clear to me what the answer is, because I sometimes people do things very violent, they think on behalf of love, on behalf of justice, and it's
Well,
clear to me there.
We must be open to the possibility that violence in the name of truth and love and justice may very occasionally be necessary in response to an extreme situation, but these cases would be very rare. So I'm not saying that it would never happen, but it's rare.
And what about this feel like being vulnerable and expressing vulnerability? Is that I kind of come to see that as a belief in separation.
It depends, Mondi, what you mean by feeling vulnerable. Awareness is utterly vulnerable in the sense that it is open indiscriminately to all experience. It cannot resist any experience. In that sense, awareness is vulnerable. However, the word vulnerability is more commonly used in relation to the propensity of the separate self to feel hurt or diminished or disrespected.
Yes.
And so you feel someone, what is more often understood by the word vulnerable, someone who is easily offended, easily hurt, easily upset. It's oversensitive. Awareness is pure sensitivity. The ego or the separate self is oversensitive. It is easily hurt. It feels diminished or slighted by the slightest thing that goes wrong. If somebody doesn't smile at us the right way, or doesn't say the right thing, or do the right thing. So the sensitivity of awareness, or the vulnerability, the innate sensitivity or vulnerability of awareness is quite a different thing from the oversensitivity or the egoic vulnerability of the separate self. We should have different words for them, really.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
And one often masquerades as the other.
Yes.
And it's very common in certain areas of spirituality now to not discriminate between these two, to mix up the so-called vulnerability of the separate self, the propensity to be hurt very easily, with the innate vulnerability of awareness, and therefore to spiritualize the ego's emotions. It's one of the ways the ego appropriates the spiritual path and uses it to validate and serve its own ends, to perpetuate itself. And it's very common in your part of the world. Please don't get me wrong. I don't mean to criticize your part of the world. Many beautiful. I have many lovely friends there. We've just come back from the West Coast, in fact. But and many beautiful things in that area of the world. So please take my my criticism of West Coast Tantra in the context in a broader context. I think that many wonderful ideas and movements have also come from the openness and the intelligence that is characteristic of many people in your part of the world. So please understand my comments in that context.
Yes. Yeah. I think the question kind of stems a little bit personally too, because I just in regard to accepting. So when we talk about the investigating on whose behalf, a lot of the help that I've received in my life, there was this encouragement to accept my thoughts and feelings, but a lot of them were like beliefs in.
Monique, you are studying psychology, and therefore you are open to all kinds of influences, all kinds of psychological approaches, and you are living on the West Coast in the hotbed of contemporary spirituality. So you are being, you are absorbing, and you are being subjected to all kinds of approaches. So be discriminating. They are not all saying the same thing. It's very common to think, oh, everybody is talking about the same thing in a different way. That is not, it's not, of course, ultimately, everything that is said is an expression of awareness. But these approaches are not all the same approaches in different language. Some of them are, some of them aren't. So you must be very discriminating. And I know with your studies of psychology and your exploration of the spiritual traditions, you're exploring all kinds of approaches, and it is necessary to be very discriminating. They all, or nearly all of them, have some degree of truth in not dismissing them. Most of them have a degree of truth, but the different approaches vary in the extent to which they are clear expressions of truth. And as you explore these matters more, you are becoming. We've had several conversations now. I can see that you're questioning everything that you're hearing, and I hope questioning everything you're hearing from me as well, and beginning to form this discrimination, which to begin with, when one is exposed to all this, it is difficult to discriminate between these different approaches. So you're doing exactly the right thing, exploring, questioning, doubting, and you should doubt what I say as well. I include this approach, doubt everything, check everything against the truth of your own experience.